When Julius Caesar was suddenly assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BC, he left behind many unfinished plans, which could have had a dramatic impact on history. Among the most ambitious of these was the summoning of a vast army to wage war against the Parthian Empire. In our previous episodes, we laid the groundwork for this event, which began with a campaign into Dacia, an interbellum period of consolidation in Rome, and a precursor invasion of Armenia. Now we shall endeavor to bring this great expedition to life, and attempt to read the tea leaves regarding the ultimate fate of Julius Caesar, as well as the fallout of this alternate timeline. Exploring alternate history timelines can be a fascinating mental exercise, but all this hypothesizing from the general's armchair can leave you craving action. And what better way to get that rush than to build a team from over 600 champions to fight epic bosses or explore mysterious dungeons. You can find all this adventure and more through our sponsor raid, Shadow Legends, available on mobile and PC. The game offers a ton of ways to play, with my top 3 themed champions being the following: Sir Nicholas for his insane tankiness and buffs, Cleopteryx for her awesome model and hybrid role, and Norog for his sheer brutality. Having this amount of options is one of my favorite game features. Test your mettle in this month's schedule of special events and activities, including Forge Pass Season 3. These come with amazing rewards, such as a limited edition artifact set. In addition, Madame Ceres is getting new skins, while Death Knight finally ascends to the status of Legendary Champion. There's never been a better time to get started, so new players, use my link or scan the QR code right here, and get a free starter pack worth almost $30, the free champion Ina, and also this added in-game loot. You'll find your rewards here in your inbox for the next 30 days only. Enjoy! Our narrative thus far has followed a single alternate history timeline whose trajectory was based on the following 2 inputs. 1. Reports of Caesar's plans prior to his assassination, as recorded by the 1st century historians Appian, Plutarch, and Suetonius. And 2. The outcome of similar historical events from the era, such as Trajan's Dacian War and Antony's Parthian Campaign. This approach presented a fairly reasonable reconstruction of an alternate timeline. Naturally, however, the further we stray from actual history, the more our uncertainty builds. At this point, we have made it to the middle of 43 BC, a year and 3 months past the Ides of March. In doing so, I would say that we have waded to the end of the shallows of our imagination and are now looking out into the deep. But rather than get in over our heads with speculation, it will now be more appropriate to split our single alternate timeline into several branches which will diverge based on the potential outcome of key events. With this framework in mind, let us now proceed. Our narrative had left off in the middle of 43 BC. Caesar had taken control of Armenia, but was significantly delayed in the process. As he set about securing his holdings and preparing his next moves, it would be the Parthians who seized the initiative with the counterattack against Syria. This offensive is based on a real event which took place in 39 BC when Prince Pacorus led an invasion to capitalize on Roman distractions following Caesar's death. For our exercise, we can consider what various degrees of success or failure might mean in the context of this key event. On one end of the spectrum will be the critical success of Pacorus. Historically, this is what happened at the outset of the campaign, when the prince led forces to take virtually the whole of the Levant. In doing so, he defeated Roman garrisons and the armies of Herodian Judea which attempted to offer resistance. Should this same feat be achieved in our scenario, it would have dealt a crippling blow to Caesar's supply lines. The general would now be stranded in Armenia and forced to double back to deal with the threat. Doing so would have been quite dangerous with the Parthian king who remained on his flank. As the Roman columns stretch out across Armenia, they would only expose themselves to more raids and counterattacks by the mobile Easterners. Were Caesar to be killed in any of these actions, then the fallout would certainly be quite tumultuous. For now, we'll avoid opening that can of worms. Instead, we can consider the case where Caesar remains alive, but the Parthians are able to hold the line and take ground through the end of the campaigning season. Though at a stalemate, this stalling of the invincible Imperator's momentum would be seen as a sign of weakness, which others might now seek to exploit. The Dacians, for instance, who had only ever been arm-wrestled into a truce, might take this chance to reclaim the lands they had lost by sweeping across the Danube and into Thrace. Such offensives could trigger others to do the same across Rome's frontiers, and could very well destabilize much of the empire. Ultimately, this would undercut the Caesarian government's promises of stability and cause internal unrest that his political rivals could then exploit. In this branch of alternate history, the threats against Caesar will have been greatly multiplied. While he certainly might be able to negotiate these dangers, it's not hard to imagine things spiraling out of control. Loss in battle might mean an immediate death, while even survival could leave him mortally wounded in a political sense. But now let us consider another branching of history. What if the Parthian attack was a critical failure? This would be similar to what happened at the tail end of the actual invasion, when the Roman commander Publius Ventidius Bassus turned the tide on the Parthians and managed to kill Prince Pacorus at the Battle of Mount Gandaris. In our alternate timeline, such a feat might be replicated by Caesar himself, or one of his various lieutenants operating out of Syria. As happened historically, the loss of the crown prince caused a succession crisis as the grief-stricken Parthian king Orodes II relinquished the throne to his other son, Phraates IV, who in short order conducted a bloody purge of the royal family to consolidate power. Such a situation would have been mercilessly exploited by Caesar, who was a master at driving wedges between factions within the opposition. Doing so against the Parthians may have meant that his armies could more easily descend into Upper Mesopotamia. From here, he might make a play for the capital through outright conquest, or could negotiate with disaffected Parthian nobles to strike a deal that might have them placed on the throne in exchange for concessions to the Romans. Back home, this would all have been good news for Caesar's administration, which could continue to consolidate its power without the distractions of the critical success scenario we previously explored. In terms of our ongoing narrative for this video, we can plot a theoretical course somewhere between these two ends of the spectrum. This would mean that while the Parthian invasion met some success, it was only ever a temporary delay that kept the Romans at bay for at most a year, without significant losses to either side's military, economic, or political ability to wage war. Caesar will still have been eager to press forward with his planned Parthian campaign and might have used this time to better prepare for such an attack. Thus, in March of 42 BC, his armies would begin their invasion. The exact route of this campaign is subject to interpretation. Contemporary accounts of Caesar's plans are vague on this front, and anything documented would have been subject to change given the outcomes we've assumed thus far. That being said, the most straightforward approach would have been to descend from the Armenian highlands in one or more prongs with the aim of securing the region of northern Mesopotamia. This would have been similar to the later campaigns of Trajan, who took the area with overwhelming force and the methodical construction of forts to secure his rear lines. The emperor took time to make his advances, securing the new frontier in his first year before pushing south the following year. Caesar may have taken a similar approach, but given his preference for aggressive, decisive action, it is likely that he would have wished to make it to the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon as soon as possible. To this end, his vast army, which consisted of 16 legions, now backed by 20,000 Armenians, would have first forced the submission of the kingdom of Osirene to secure their back line. Surely, the diplomatic groundwork was laid for this move, which would have meant a near immediate surrender of this most exposed territory within a few weeks or at most a few months. Some forces were left behind to secure the area and reinforce the southern approaches along the Euphrates. The remaining Roman force, meanwhile, would then have swung east towards the Tigris, where they might advance with the relative safety of the mountainous region on their flank. Here, legions would likely have split into several divisions to take strategic objectives along the invasion route. This included the prominent cities of Nisibis, Zingara, and Arbela. Such moves would have been closely monitored by the Parthians, who took every opportunity to harry them along the way. However, it is debatable whether they would yet risk a pitched battle at this point. Better to let the invaders stretch themselves thin and wait for a slip-up before striking a decisive blow. Caesar, however, was a veteran of many campaigns and would not present many such opportunities by keeping his forces tightly controlled and well informed of their surroundings. Sensing the enemy's timidity in this stance, he would have continued the thrust towards Ctesiphon, which would force them to contest his move. By this point, the timeline will have advanced to at least midway through the campaign season. Our next key event will involve the Battle of Ctesiphon. It's impossible to know where this may have taken place. Perhaps the Parthians wished to fight the Romans in the more open fields beyond the capital, or perhaps they would rather strike them with a hammer blow while closer to the anvil of the capital's defenses. In the long history of warfare between the Romans and the Parthians and Sassanids, there are countless battle sites littered across Mesopotamia to choose from. With regards to Ctesiphon itself, the city played host to many showdowns, being directly threatened more than a dozen times and actually taken by force 6 times. We can now attempt to play out a couple options for Caesar's timeline. On the critical failure end of the spectrum would be a total defeat prior to even touching the walls. This might occur in a similar manner to Emperor Severus's campaign in 233 AD, when his army was crippled with indiscipline and disease, before eventually being surrounded. Here is how Herodian puts it, quote, Ardashir attacked the Roman army unexpectedly with his entire force and trapped them like fish in a net. The outnumbered Romans were unable to stem the attack of the Persian horde. They used their shields to protect those parts of their bodies exposed to the Persian arrows. Content merely to protect themselves, they offered no resistance. As a result, all the Romans were driven into one spot, where they made a wall with their shields and fought like an army under siege. Hit and wounded from every side, they held out bravely as long as they could, but in the end, all were killed. In this timeline, such a loss could easily claim Caesar's life through a battlefield wound, some disease, or perhaps some mutinous element within his own ranks. Even if he did survive, he would then have to make the arduous retreat back to Upper Mesopotamia, and then spend many months attempting to hold on to his gains before even thinking of retaking the offensive. I wouldn't put a comeback past him at this point, but as with our earlier divergence, any major military setback would risk a spiraling situation across the empire that might ultimately doom him. On the other end of the spectrum will be the critical success. Again, we can turn to the example of historical campaigns of Emperor Trajan and Julian for reference. In both cases, they advanced upon Ctesiphon with a large support fleet, with various canals being dug to facilitate their approach. In both cases, the enemy encamped on the opposite bank, resisting their advances and making any direct attack difficult. Thus it was that the Romans had to make a forced crossing to establish a beachhead, which eventually precipitated a pitched battle. Here is how the historian Ammianus Marcellinus describes Julian's experiences, which might have been comparable to our hypothetical Caesar. Quote, "He unloaded the stronger ships of those which carried provisions and artillery, and manned them each with 800 armed soldiers. In the first quiet of night, he sent one part with orders speedily to cross the river and take possession of the enemy's side of the stream. But no sooner had they reached the opposite bank than they were assailed so persistently with firebrands and every kind of inflammable material that ships and soldiers would have been consumed had not the emperor, carried away by the keen vigor of his spirit, cried out that our soldiers had, as directed, raised the signal that they were already in possession of the shore, and ordered the entire fleet to hasten to the spot with all speed of their oars. The result was that the ships were saved, uninjured, and the surviving soldiers, although assailed from above with stones and every kind of missile, after a fierce struggle, scaled the high, precipitous banks and held their positions unyieldingly. The Persians opposed to us serried bands of mail-clad horsemen in such close order that the gleam of moving bodies covered with densely fitting plates of iron dazzled the eyes of those who looked upon them, while the whole throng of horse was protected by coverings of leather. The cavalry was backed by companies of infantry, who, protected by oblong, curved shields covered with wickerwick and rawhides, advanced in very close order. Hereupon the emperor, following Homeric tactics, filled the space between the lines with the weakest of the infantry. When both sides were near enough to look each other in the face, the Romans gleaming in their crested helmets and swinging their shields, as if to the rhythm of the anapastic foot, advanced slowly, and the light-armed skirmishers opened the battle by hurling their javelins, while the earth everywhere was turned to dust by both sides and swept away in a swift whirlwind. And when the battle cry was raised in the usual manner by both sides, and the trumpet's blare increased the ardor of the men, here and there they fought hand to hand, with spears and drawn swords, and the soldiers were freer from the danger of the arrows, the more quickly they forced their way into the enemy's ranks. Meanwhile, the emperor was busily engaged in giving support to those who gave way, and in spurring on the laggards, playing the part both of a valiant fellow soldier and of a commander. Finally, the first battle line of the Persians began to waver, and at first slowly, then at quick step, turned back, and made for the neighboring city with their armor well heated up. Our soldiers pursued them, wearied though they also were after fighting on the scorching plains from the sunrise to the end of the day, and falling close at their heels, and hacking at their legs and backs, drove the whole force in headlong flight to the very walls of Ctesiphon. In this scenario, Caesar may have been able to ride the momentum of victory to take the Parthian capital without a drawn-out and bloody siege. Such an event would be excellent fodder for his propaganda, where he might now be able to play the part of the triumphant but benevolent liberator. As he paraded through the streets of Ctesiphon, he would surely have been thinking of the similar entry that his hero Alexander the Great had made into Babylon 289 years before. But as was the case with the Macedonians, merely taking control of Mesopotamia would not be enough to defeat the masters of the East. Vast lands yet extended out to the borders of India, from which the enemy might yet still mount a defense. The challenge would certainly have excited Caesar, who previously at the age of 31 had once bemoaned that he had achieved so little when compared to Alexander the Great. Now would be his chance to not just follow in the footsteps of the hero, but to perhaps even surpass him, and in so doing achieve everlasting fame. But that timeline is not one we will further explore. Instead, let us consider once more the middle path between critical success and critical failure. Admittedly, there are many timelines to choose from within this range. We will consider the case where Caesar is able to leverage his army's vast size and engineering skills to drive a wedge between the Parthian army and Ctesiphon, eventually managing to strangle it into submission, as had been done at Alicia. In this case, he is able to take the city after a grueling effort, but not to outright defeat the enemy's main army. Thus, he will be able to claim a symbolic victory and winter in Ctesiphon at the end of 42 BC. At this point, however, his forces very likely will have been ground down and in need of fresh supplies and manpower. Any efforts to bring these to Caesar, though, would have been intercepted by the mobile Parthians, and only the largest of relief forces, perhaps commanded by one of Caesar's trusted lieutenants, could make the journey. Whatever the case, history shows that it would have been quite difficult for the Romans to establish a lasting presence in this region. Even for Caesar, matters of logistics and issues on other frontiers would eventually force a withdrawal. But whether this might take place immediately, or over a matter of months, years, or decades is again debatable. Likely, Caesar would have found a way to consolidate his gains in northern Mesopotamia and engage in diplomacy to secure the new eastern frontier. This might have involved deals with local kingdoms, intermarriages between prominent figures, and all sorts of geopolitical arrangements. Certainly, new provinces would be formed, whose governance could be doled out by Caesar to leverage even more control over the politicians back at home. Perhaps his would-be assassins might now be brought into the fold of the administration with eastern postings and invitations to participate in future campaigns. At the same time, Cleopatra and her son by Caesar, Caesarion, might also be a key piece of the puzzle. After all, the breadbasket of Egypt would be a key strategic center for supporting activities in the east, and the Ptolemies had deep roots in the region, which might be leaned upon for the restructuring of the region's balance of power. On a macro level, it's interesting to consider what this eastern focus would have meant for the Roman Empire. After all, this was always a highly prosperous region in terms of spoils and taxation, which promised far greater return on investment than expeditions into distant Germania and Britannia. Perhaps now that a toehold had been established in the east, the Roman army would see more sustained deployment in this area of the world. This in turn might mean no disaster of Teutoburg and no costly Germanic or Britannic wars. Thus, the trajectory of the Roman Empire might significantly be altered to have an eastern focus earlier on. The downstream effects that this might have, not only on the fate of neighboring civilizations of the period, but also the future emergence of Christianity and Islam in the region, is mind-blowing to even think about. But perhaps the greatest point to consider in this alternate timeline is what is the eventual fate of Julius Caesar. Having achieved so much and accumulated untold amounts of power, how does that power get transferred to the next generation? This was a question which had bedeviled the Romans ever since the real-life assassination of Caesar. Initially, it took a renewed civil war for Augustus to claim the throne, and in so doing, to reforge the Republic into an empire. Even then, the ideas of succession were ever-changing and turbulent, with frequent bouts of fighting. It's hard to guess exactly what direction Caesar would have steered the realm. However, power, once concentrated, is very difficult to pry free of an iron fist. Thus I think that an aging Julius Caesar would have done much the same as Augustus by slowly repurposing republican institutions to serve his purposes. His partisans, meanwhile, would continue to be promoted, and his heirs would have been strategically positioned to maintain the new power structure. In the end, I also find it likely that the transition to empire would have been a natural one, given the practicalities of governing such an expansive domain from Rome. We could go on and on with speculation, but at some point, Julius Caesar will have perished from injuries, illness, or old age. But what circumstances led to this event, or would lead from it, shall have to be left to the oracles of the past. In any case, I hope you enjoyed our exploration of what if Caesar was not assassinated. Let me know what other topics you'd like to see us cover next. A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more history, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.